My hometown is a quaint countryside town with just a few thousand residents. The nearest city is hours away. In this tight-knit community, everyone knows each other, and word travels fast. During my high school years, I had a best friend named Chris. We spent most of our days together. One autumn, there was much talk about an abandoned farmhouse on the town's outskirts that people were exploring. The house had sat empty for the past 5 years, left to decay on the edge of town. As the rumors spread, stories were told, and dares were made to explore the place. One weekend night, Chris suggested we check it out. Equipped with flashlights, we drove to the farmhouse. It was a bit challenging to find the driveway, which had likely become overgrown, so we parked on the road and walked through the field toward the house. The moon's soft light illuminated our path, leading us to the eerie house. The yard was overgrown with weeds, and vines clung to the dilapidated exterior. Chris led the way inside through an open doorway. Once inside, we explored the decrepit interior, but after a few minutes, we had seen all there was to see on the first floor. We decided to venture upstairs. The upper floor was shrouded in darkness, and our flashlights illuminated a single hallway with 2 doors. The door on the left was locked, while the one on the right was not. I entered the open room, only to find it empty and decaying except for one strange feature. A window was covered with wooden planks, preventing any view of the outside. Curiosity got the better of me, and I peered between the slabs of wood, which revealed nothing of interest, just a view of the moonlit field we had crossed earlier. That's when I noticed a figure approaching the farmhouse from that direction. I quickly left the window and alerted Chris that someone was coming. Our hearts raced, and the sight of the approaching figure scared us. We fled down the stairs and heard the door open and footsteps behind us. We reached the field and didn't stop until we got to the car. Neither of us spoke during the drive home. We had been incredibly foolish, and I couldn't defend our actions. However, something about the house felt off, and it's possible there was more to the story. A month later, the farmhouse was demolished without explanation, leaving us with unanswered questions. A couple of years ago, while attending online college classes, I worked at our local Papa John's. It's not a job many aspire to have, but it was flexible with my school schedule, and that was what I needed. I worked 3 days a week, Friday through Sunday, taking on closing shifts as a delivery driver. Our Papa John's wasn't the busiest place, and I often spent my time in the back, chatting with co-workers while waiting for orders to come in. The clock had just struck 11 when a new order came through. My co-worker took the order and got it into the oven. Within minutes, I was retrieving the pizza and heading to the customer's location. The delivery took me to a typical suburban neighborhood, about a 10-minute drive away. When I reached the customer's house, I walked up to the front door, intending to ring the doorbell. However, a handwritten sign taped to the door caught my attention. It read, "Do not knock or use doorbell." I was puzzled, as it appeared to be addressing me specifically. Unsure of what to do, I called the customer's number. The call rang once, and then I heard a ringtone coming from inside the house, faint but audible. The sound seemed to originate from the back of the house. After a few rings, the call was abruptly denied. Strange as it was, there was no visible movement in the windows, and I heard nothing else. I leaned in closer to the door, trying to listen more intently, but it remained eerily quiet. Suddenly, there was a frenzied noise of footsteps thundering down the stairs inside the house. The loud, chaotic racket shook the entire building, and the footsteps approached the front door. My heart raced as I waited for the door to open. The door swung open, revealing a customer with a blank expression who accepted the pizza box without a word. Just as suddenly, there was a loud thump from inside the house. I peered past the customer, but the interior was shrouded in darkness, and I could see nothing. Then, the door slammed shut, and I heard it being locked. I waited for a moment, but there were no more sounds. I returned to my car, but something about the situation unnerved me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Glancing at the other houses on the street, I noticed that most of the neighborhood was dark, with only a few scattered lights. My unease grew as I watched the fog descend on the road, obscuring my view. I waited for half an hour, keeping a vigilant eye on my mirrors, Then, I heard it again. Footsteps. The sound grew louder as someone approached from the darkness within the forest. A man emerged from the trees, walked directly to my car, and knocked on the window. I explained that I couldn't roll it down, but the man said nothing. He tried to open the car door and then moved to the back of the car, appearing to fidget with something in his hands. At that moment, headlights pierced the fog as a car pulled up behind mine. The man watched as my friend parked and approached my car cautiously. We decided to leave my car behind and called the police. However, after a thorough search, they found nothing unusual at the house, and it was reported that only one man lived there. The incident still leaves me with unanswered questions about what transpired that night. This was unexpected and unsettling, and it made me wonder if something was wrong. I couldn't understand the language the man was speaking, but it was clear that he was agitated. What puzzled me was that there was no response from anyone else. It was as if he was yelling into the void. Uncertain about what to do, I decided to approach cautiously to determine if everything was okay. I didn't want to leave the trail and risk getting lost, but I also felt a sense of unease. The sun would set in a couple of hours, and I didn't want to be wandering in the woods when darkness fell. As I moved closer to the source of the noise, the man's angry voice grew louder, and it appeared that he was just off the trail, but I still couldn't see him. Eventually, he fell silent, and I was left in an eerie quiet. In my gut, I felt that something was not right. I called out to Brandon, thinking it might be him, but there was no response. I called out again, louder this time, but still, no answer. The silence was unsettling, and my instincts were telling me that I should head back. However, as I turned to retrace my steps, I saw a flashlight beam in the woods ahead of me, moving around as though someone was walking with it. It was near one of the other trails, and the light appeared to be getting closer. I was momentarily relieved, thinking it might be Brandon. But then, just before I could see the person holding the flashlight, it abruptly turned off and the footsteps ceased. It was dark, and the forest fell silent once more. I called out for Brandon, but there was no response. The knot of anxiety in my stomach tightened. I felt that the person with the flashlight was still out there watching me. As I stood there, my unease growing, I realized that waiting for him to reveal himself was not the right course of action. Something about the situation made me decide to leave, so I packed up my things, left the campsite behind, and made my way back to safety. I didn't think I was followed, and I managed to leave the area without further incident. When I contacted the police the next day, they were unable to find any trace of Brandon. His disappearance remained a mystery, and it was believed that he may have encountered the same person I had, who may have taken him. It's a haunting thought, wondering whether things would have turned out differently if I had accompanied him on the first day, or if I too would have disappeared. Before the trip, my manager had to push back my requested days off by a day, creating a scheduling snag. I communicated this with my friend, whom I'll call Brandon, and he decided to hike out to the campsite a day ahead of me. He insisted on spending the first night there alone, stating that he would enjoy it. I had no reason to object, so I agreed, and he promised to notify me once he set everything up. As I embarked on my journey the following morning, I sent a text to Brandon to inform him that I was on my way. Unfortunately, I lost phone service and I didn't receive a response. However, I didn't think much of it, as various factors could have contributed to the lack of communication. Upon my arrival at the campsite, something felt amiss. Brandon was nowhere to be found. I searched the tent and its vicinity, but he was conspicuously absent. I didn't initially panic, assuming that he might have gone fishing by the nearby river, or embarked on a hike to soak in some scenic views. This area had numerous spots he could explore, including trails, and I couldn't be certain where he had ventured. I dropped my bag and set up my tent, lighting a fire to heat up some canned food. I reasoned that Brandon would likely return by mid-afternoon since he had set out early. However, as the day progressed, anxiety began to gnaw at me. When 5 o'clock rolled around, I became increasingly concerned. I attempted to look for signs of his presence, hoping for shoe prints or some indication of his whereabouts. Unfortunately, the area around the campsite was marked with numerous footprints that led in various directions, making it impossible to discern which path he had taken. My phone still had no service, and there was no way for me to determine if something was wrong. My only viable option was to stay put and hope that Brandon would return. I couldn't risk going off on my own with the night rapidly approaching. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I threw more wood onto the fire, anxiously waiting for his return. However, at that moment, I noticed a flashlight beam sweeping through the forest, just beyond the trees. The light moved around as if someone was walking with it. I thought that it must be Brandon returning from his exploration, and relief washed over me. But suddenly, the light extinguished, and the footsteps ceased. My calls to Brandon were met with silence, and my gut instinct told me that something wasn't right. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me from the shadows, and my unease grew. The person with the flashlight remained out there in the darkness, and I was seized by an unshakable sense of dread. In that moment, I knew that I had to leave. I quickly packed my belongings and left the campsite, my senses on high alert, but I didn't detect any pursuit. While I escaped without further incident, it wasn't until the next day that the police could get involved. We returned to the campsite and found it undisturbed, but there was no sign of Brandon. His trail showed that he had wandered off one of the trails and deeper into the woods. Another set of footprints beside his hinted at the presence of someone else. Brandon never reappeared, and the investigation into his disappearance went cold after a few days. It's a haunting thought that he may have been taken by the same person who had been lurking in the woods,